Thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Michael Strand. I'm the chair of the Peterborough Democratic Committee. And welcome to Post and Beam. If you haven't met them, that's the Yanggang. Also very important, I wore a tie tonight because I knew Andrew wouldn't. The thing about Andrew Yang is not just that he's the smartest candidate in this race, and being Asian doesn't have a damn thing to do with it. He's the most intelligent American running because he understands complex problems and offers solutions in ways few other candidates can or have the courage to. Andrew Yang is a critical voice who needs to play a leading role in our national, social, and economic conversation. And he's here, this far along, in this large of a race, both in spite of where he came from and because of it. Andrew and I actually have something in common, believe it or not. Both of us have family who are peanut farmers. Mine weren't in China, but they were my great-great-grandparents recently arrived from Europe once upon a time, working in California and facing down a Great Depression that ruined their farm and led many American-born and recent immigrants alike to sleep on dirt floors, just like Andrew's grandparents did. I'm not sure whether those floors were any nicer in California, but the point is we're all here because of those who struggled before us. And we better be ready and willing to struggle so that we can live up to the legacy our future demands of us. If not, what we'll leave behind, and perhaps more tragically, what we might not leave behind, will be catastrophic in consequence for our descendants. You know, the American journey is one of many migrations and even more immigrants, past, present, and future. That journey is one we're all part of, and it's a journey that's far from over. We don't exist as some distant bookend in the past story of ourselves. You would think that's obvious, but plenty of other politicians and elected officials and candidates can't seem to figure out that math. Andrew Yang understands the math of American history. He actually gets it, he's ready, he's been ready, and he's not going anywhere. And he's here to tell you himself. I won't pretend to be in the same league when it comes to talking policy. But if you are looking for a candidate who will transcend the perils of our partisan past, if you're looking for a future that is neither left nor right, but forward, do two things for me. Number one, keep this man on the debate stage, in the media, on TV, in our communities, where he will continue to speak complex solutions to difficult truths about a future that requires us to be present now, if we wish to be present years from now. Do that by seeing Christina, she's over there somewhere, and donate whatever you can to keep Andrew's voice in this conversation. $10, $5, $2, whatever you can. Number two, the second thing, join me in welcoming Andrew Yang to Peterborough. He's here somewhere, I promise.
You get a crowd surf in or what?
He's very close physically. He's even closer metaphysically. He is with you right now.
You'd be surprised how close he is to where you're standing right now.
So I think what I'm going to do is turn it over to someone who's a little more eloquent than myself. Most of you guys know who this character is. This is Steve Marchand.
All right. How y'all doing tonight? Are you warm yet? Getting all warmed up? He is here, and so are another 50 people who could not get inside. And so the rain has stopped. The clouds have parted. Another metaphysical moment. And he'll be in a few minutes. But he's giving a little love to the folks who apparently were not as punctual as you. Have we already given a big shout out to the folks here tonight at Post and Beam for hosting us tonight? Another round of applause. Very nice. Obviously, if you're driving, be thoughtful, but grab a beer. If you're not driving, you grab 2 beers. How many here tonight have seen Andrew speak in person before? All right. The rest of you are about to join the Yanggang. I met him in January. A friend of mine, mutual friend, said, "Hey, you guys might connect." So we did. And by the way, some of you I know pretty well. I ran for governor last year. I love the town of Peterborough. And so we know some folks. And so we got together, and I realized, why do I like this guy so much? Like me, 44 years old, first generation American, father of 2 who really likes math. How the heck can you not like this guy? He is very close. There he is. But let me tell you, I met this guy, stuck with him, signed up with him in April. People then were wondering why this guy I've never heard of. Well, they've heard of him. The country is hearing of him. As his name ID has gone up, his place on the stage keeps moving closer and closer and closer to the dead center, because he represents the center of America, the future of America, at a time when we need big change and we need big leadership, and he is here in Peterborough. Ladies and gentlemen, the next president of the United States, Andrew Yang.
Andrew Yang, 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 Andrew Yang. Let's go, Yang!
Hey, long time no see. Here you are.
Hello, New Hampshire. It's great to be back. Look at this room. What you may not know is that there are dozens of people who are outside who've been told there is not room for them here. So you should feel very, very savvy for getting here early and on time. You know what that means? Next time we need a bigger venue. Oh, I love it. I love it. I've been coming here for a year and a half. And every time the energy gets higher, the crowds get bigger, and the vision gets clearer that we can fix the problems that got Donald Trump elected in the first place. Am I right, New Hampshire?
Yeah!
I'll do that. It's great to be back. And when I say back in New Hampshire, how many of you know that I went to high school here in the state? I went to Phillips Exeter Academy. I graduated in 1992. They just had me back a few months ago to speak. And I was honest when I got there. I said, I haven't been back in years because I did not have a good time here. And the student body then erupted in applause. And I was just like, oh my gosh. I didn't expect that reaction. Some things never change. So after I graduate, I'm going to give you a bit of a narrative arc. So I graduate from high school in 92. I go to Brown University, not that far from here. Not sure what to do, so I went to law school. Became an unhappy lawyer for 5 whole months. And I left to start a business. How many of you have started a business or organization or club or mailing list? So if you have your hand up, you know that it's very hard. And when someone asks you how it's going, what do you say?
Great.
It's great. There's only one answer to that question. So my business went great until it failed. Had its mini rise and maximum fall. My parents told people I was still a lawyer. And so during that time, I realized just how tough it was, but I'd been bitten by the bug. And so I went to work at another small company and then another, had some success, eventually became the CEO of an education company that grew to become #1 in the US and was bought by a bigger company in 2009. 2009 was a tough time in most of the country. How was it here in this part of New Hampshire? Not good, right? And I thought I had a clue or some insight as to why things were so bleak. it was because all of the whiz kids I went to Exeter and Brown and Columbia with had gone to Wall Street and dreamt up these financial instruments that had crashed the economy. And so I thought, well, that's a train wreck. So what could we give them to do that would be a step up or a big leg up? And at the time, I thought what the country needed was more jobs, more businesses, more entrepreneurship. So I left my job as the president of this division of this public company, and I donated some money to start a new organization called Venture for America. And what that organization does is it takes aspiring entrepreneurs, brings them to places like Detroit, Cleveland, Birmingham, New Orleans, cities around the country. So I put in some money to seed the organization, and then I started calling rich friends with this question: do you love America? And then the savvy among them said, what does it mean if I say yes? And then I said at least $10,000. And then 12 of them said, I love America for $10,000. It's like, I thought you did. So raised a couple $100,000, then it grew and grew. Fast forward 6-7 years, helped create several thousand jobs around the country. I was honored by the Obama administration as an ambassador of global entrepreneurship. Got to bring my wife to meet the president. So my in-laws liked me a lot for about a week. So I was getting clapped on the back. People were giving me these accolades and awards saying, how did you do it? But I had this sinking feeling because as I was traveling the country, I saw the gulf that exists, the disparities, where if you fly between St. Louis and San Francisco or Michigan and Manhattan, you feel like you're traversing decades and dimensions and ways of life and not just a few time zones. How many of you grew up here in the Northeast, the New England area? How about the Midwest? The South? West Coast? Oh, a few people. So I grew up in Schenectady and upstate New York, and then I came of age here in New England. So I had never seen the Midwest and the South until my time as CEO of Venture for America. And so I was digesting everything I was seeing. But then in 2016, Donald Trump became our president. And if you're here in this room, you probably reacted quite negatively to this development.
Oh, yeah.
Though there are many people that you were friends and neighbors with and family members that were excited about it. To me, it was a giant red flag. It was like oh my gosh, things have gotten so bad that tens of millions of our fellow Americans decided to take a chance on the narcissist reality TV star as our president. And that's a giant red flag. And imagine being the guy who's getting medals and awards for creating jobs around the country and feeling like my work was like pouring water into a bathtub that had a giant hole ripped in the bottom. That for every job my entrepreneurs were creating, we're going to lose dozens or hundreds of jobs. Now, automation. So I'm going to go through some of the patterns of automation that you all are probably familiar with from your day-to-day lives. How many of you have noticed stores closing where you live here in New Hampshire? And why are those stores closing down? Amazon, that's right, one-word answer. Amazon soaking up $20 billion in business every year. It's closing 30% of America's stores and malls. And, I buy stuff off Amazon. It's very, it's convenient. How much did Amazon pay in taxes last year? Zero. So that is the math. 20 billion out, zero back in. And the most common job in most of the country.
How much did Amazon cost us in taxes last year?
Yeah, if you're a $1 trillion tech company paying zero in taxes, what should that have been? It should have been tens of billions of dollars easily. And the most common job in most of the country is working in retail as a retail clerk or cashier. The average retail worker is a 39-year-old woman making between $9 and $11 an hour. So when that store or mall closes, what is her next move going to be? How many of you have seen self-serve kiosks in a fast food restaurant? McDonald's is rolling out self-serve kiosks in every location in the United States by 2021, 2 years from now. And food service and food preparation is the third most common job in the United States. Most common job, when you all call the customer service line of a big company and you get the bot, what do? You pound 000, say human, human, human until you get someone on the line, right? Raise your hand if that's what you do. Oh, I do that too. Don't worry, that software is irritating. But in 2 or 3 years, the software is going to sound like this. Hey, Andrew, how's it going? What can I do for you? It's going to be delightful, efficient, a little bit seductive, apparently. You might not even realize it's software. What's that going to mean for the 2.5 million Americans who work in call centers for a living making $14 an hour? I just spoke to a group of 70 CEOs in New York City, and I asked them, how many of you are looking at having software or AI get rid of your back office clerical workers? Guess how many hands went up out of 70? All 70. That's right. They know what's coming, and those are all of their incentives. They could actually be fired if they turn down that deal. If I'm a software company and say, hey, great news, I can get rid of your 1,000 back office call center workers with this software. If you don't do that deal, then you'll be fired in the next quarter or two, because that's the way our incentives are designed. These are the trends of the fourth industrial revolution. We're in the greatest economic transformation in the history of our country. And if you look up and look at the outcome in 2016 when Donald Trump became our president, why would you think that he won if you just turned on cable news?
Russia.
Russia, immigrants. What did you say, Mona? Oh, it's like, oh yeah. It's Russia, immigrants. What else on the list?
He was famous and running against 17 other people.
Votes from labor.
The reality star element for sure. Hillary Clinton, perhaps. Emails, FBI, Facebook, women, freezing time. All of these were in the mix. But when I looked at the numbers, there's a proximate cause that's really, really clear and distinct and tells the story in numbers, where we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs that were based in Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Iowa. And if that list of states sounds familiar, those are all the swing states he needed to win. You get rid of 4 million manufacturing jobs in those states. And if you doubt this, there's actually a direct correlation between the adoption of industrial robots in a voting district and the movement towards Trump. It's a straight line up to the right. It's the most direct correlation you can find. Now, you never hear that on cable news. When's the last time you heard a politician say the words fourth industrial revolution?
Just now.
Just now. And I'm barely a politician. So these are the things that I identified in 2017 when I was researching. I was like, oh my gosh, like how did Donald Trump win? Oh, we automated away these jobs. We're doing the same thing to retail and call centers and food service and eventually truck driving, which I can talk about at length, which is going to be an epic disaster. And my first move was not to run for president. My first move was to go to our leaders in Washington, D.C. and say, hey, what are we going to do about this? And what do you think the folks in Washington, D.C. said to me when I asked, what are we going to do about this? So the three most common answers I got were, number one, we cannot talk about that. Number two, we should study that further. And number three, we must educate and retrain Americans for the jobs of the future. And this third one sounds very responsible. You're like, oh, okay, we're all set. But I looked at the numbers. Do you all want to guess what the effectiveness rate was for the federally funded retraining programs for the manufacturing workers in the Midwest who lost their jobs? 17%. He's saying 5% or less. That's not far off. It's 0 to 15%. They're a dud. And so when I said to them, it's like, hey, it turns out the success rates of those programs are abysmally low. You know what their response was after that? I guess we'll get better at it. That's what passes for policy out of D.C. And someone in Washington, D.C. said something that brought me here to you all tonight. He said, Andrew, no one in Washington, D.C. is going to do anything about this set of problems, because this is not a town of leaders, this is a town of followers. And the only way we will do anything about it is if you create a wave in other parts of the country and bring it crashing down on our heads. And I'm so glad I had someone with me for that meeting, because you would think I was making that up. You'd think that was some kind of weird Hollywood supervillain speech. Instead, it was a DC lobbyist. And it's true. And I heard this and I said, challenge accepted. I'll be back with the wave. And that's why I'm here with you tonight, people in New Hampshire. So this is the arc. This is the arc that brought me here to you all, that got me out of my seat and said, okay, I get it. My country does not understand what is happening to it. We are scapegoating immigrants for things that immigrants have nothing to do with. We got rid of the manufacturing jobs. We're now going to do the same thing with these other jobs. And I'm going to just take a minute to paint a picture about truck driving. How many of you all know a truck driver here in New Hampshire? It's one of the most common jobs in 29 states in this country. There are 3.5 million truckers. Average age 49, 94% men. Average education, high school or 1 year of college. Make about $50,000 a year on average. It's a very difficult, demanding job. You're away from your family 4 days a week. But it's one of the lifeblood of our economy. It's like a backbone. My friends in Silicon Valley are working on trucks that can drive themselves. And they're motivated by the money. The cost savings for automating away truck driving jobs are estimated to be $168 billion per year. I want you all to think about that number for a second. $168 billion per year. This is why we have hundreds of the smartest engineers in our country working on solving this problem. Because if you solve that problem, the payout is in the hundreds of billions of dollars. If you're a professional investor and someone comes to you and says, hey, I've got some sensors and some technology that can move that process forward, you throw down millions of dollars to invest. Because this is the biggest pot of gold, one of the biggest pots of gold in American business today. Saying that they're not going to succeed, they tell me they're 98% of the way there right now. How many of you knew that there are robot trucks on our highways right now that UPS invested in the Southwest? Oh yeah, right now. You can Google it. Now, the reason why they're in Arizona is because the self-driving trucks are really bad with something called snow. So they test them in warm places where it's not going to snow. But they think they can get over the snow hurdle through something called teleoperators. So bear with me. You remember the first time you saw TV on your cell phone? You remember that? Remember that? And then thinking like, wow, we can do that now? I can like actually watch a video and it's not choppy or weird. So that's 3G. We're in the process of rolling out 5G around the country. And what they're doing with trucks is they're going to equip them with teleoperating software so that if the truck is not sure what to do because of bad weather, a teleoperator is going to beam into the truck from Nevada or Arizona and drive it like a video game. There are cameras in the front. Essentially, you're turning the semi-truck into a drone. And then the drone pilot will be in Arizona or Nevada, and they'll beam in, drive it while the computer's not sure, and then the computer will go beep, 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 and then it'll be like, I'm confident again, and then the teleoperator will beam back out. What do you think the ratio is going to be between the teleoperators and the 3.5 million truckers?
1%.
1 to 100, 2 to 100?
Just one. There's going to be one guy in Kansas.
There's one guy who just beams into them all. What's that going to mean for the 3.5 million truckers or the 7 million Americans who work in truck stops, motels, and diners that rely upon the truckers getting out and having a meal? If you're a trucker, only 13% of American truckers are unionized. 87% are in mom and pop businesses. A lot of them took out personal loans that are essentially mortgages to get their own trucks. Imagine if you were a trucker who had a couple of trucks that you owed hundreds of thousands of dollars on, and then all of a sudden you're competing against robot trucks that never stop.
So we have it in New York City taxi medallion.
It's like having a New York City taxi medallion, that's right. Where those medallions were a secure livelihood for a long time, and then along came the ride-sharing companies. This is like that on steroids. So these are the real problems, and they're not going to go away after we get rid of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not forever. But these problems are just now accelerating. So this is the vision we have to take to the rest of the country. And what is that vision? If you're here tonight, you heard something like this at some point. There's an Asian man running for president who wants to give everyone $1,000 a month. Do you remember hearing that in New Hampshire? Nothing like the first time you heard that. And then the first time, it sounds like a gimmick, it sounds like a joke, it sounds like it will never happen. But if you dig into our country's history, it's deeply American. Thomas Paine was for it at the founding of the country. He called it the citizens' dividend. Martin Luther King championed it and fought for it in 1967. And it is what he was fighting for the day he was assassinated in 1968. It was so mainstream that 1,000 economists endorsed it, and it passed the U.S. House of Representatives twice in 1971 under Richard Nixon. Came this close to passing. It's called the Family Assistance Plan. The government was so into it, they started giving money out to Americans just to see what would happen. And the data came back and it was very positive, came this close. The reason it didn't pass was that a study came out that erroneously said that giving people money increased divorce rates. And then they got a little gun shy, and then the moment passed. Then it turns out that study was wrong. But then Nixon had his problems, and then and then it got away from us. But then I actually talked to someone who worked in Democratic politics in the Senate during that time period, and he said to me, he's a little bit older now, he said to me, this was the biggest mistake we ever made. He said we should have just taken that deal. Because if they'd taken that deal, that would have set an income floor for every family from 1971 till now. Can you imagine how different things would be? Came this close. But 11 years later, one state passed a dividend where now everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year. No questions asked. And what state is that?
Alaska.
And how do they pay for it?
Oil.
And what is the oil of the 21st century?
Technology.
Technology, software, big data, self-driving cars and trucks. A study just came out that said that our data is now worth more than oil. Do you remember getting your data check in the mail, New Hampshire? No, but someone's getting your data check in the mail. I have a feeling it's Facebook, it's Amazon, it's Google, like they're getting the data checks over and over again. They're profiting to the tune of billions of dollars, and we're seeing none of it. So what started out sounding like a gimmick actually becomes a necessary move to help us evolve in the 21st century, to build an economy that will actually work for us. If you give Americans our tiny, tiny fair share of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, every robot truck mile, we can generate hundreds of billions in new revenue very, very quickly. If we do not have that mechanism in place, then our communities will just continue to get sucked dry while these mega tech companies pay zero or next to zero in taxes. And then we're just looking around being like, where's the money going? Where's the money going? Anyone know where the money's going? Like, we know where the money's going if we're paying attention. Unfortunately, and I'm going to suggest this to you all, whose fault is it if Amazon pays zero in taxes? It's our fault. It's not their fault. They're doing their job. Their job is to pay as little in taxes as possible. It's our job to make sure that can't happen. And I'm going to say to you all, New Hampshire, it is your job. If you don't do this job, we're going to get another 4 years of our economy essentially getting pirated out from underneath us. This is for you. You are the only people that can make an actual functioning human-centered economy happen. If you all don't take this baton up, then it fades away. That's why I'm here with you all tonight. How many presidential candidates have you seen during the cycle? Just hold up a set of fingers. So this would be 5, 2 hands would be 10 or more. Look at that. 11. So why are all of the candidates coming to you? Because each of you is worth 1,000 Californians. That's right. What is the fire code here in this room?
About 57 less than are in it.
So whatever the fire code is, we have exactly that number of people in this room. So let's call it 200. No, I don't know what the fire code is. I don't want to misspeak. Let's say the fire code is 100. This is like 100,000 Californians. That's like 2.5 football stadiums. This is the kind of room you can actually start a revolution from very, very quickly. That's why we're all here. We've all done the same math. You all have the future of the country in your hands, and we love you for it. This is one of the only places where democracy actually works the way it's intended. You go to the rest of the country and you say, hey, your vote matters. They don't think their vote matters. And they're generally correct. Because they look up at our government and they see there are giant pipes clogged full of millions of dollars. It's been overrun by corporate interests. And they're like, my vote doesn't matter next to the billions, the millions, the rest of it. They're generally right. Americans are pretty smart. No? Your votes matter. It does not take that many people here in New Hampshire to change the future of this country very, very quickly. So you have the freedom dividend on one hand, and then we have to actually have different goals and measurements for ourselves. How many of you got excited about GDP when you woke up this morning? You were like, oh, I'm going to make a big contribution today. It's going to be a good GDP day. My wife is at home with our 2 boys right now, one of whom is autistic. What is her work included at in GDP every year?
0.
0. And we know that's perverse. We know, I was off the trail watching our kids for 2 days, and you know what I said after a couple of days? Get me back to doing something easy like running for president as quickly as possible. Because the work is so challenging, but it's the most important work there is. And in our economic measurements, it's a 0. GDP is something we made up almost 100 years ago, and even the inventor, Simon Kuznets, said this. He said we should never use this as a measurement for national well-being because it's terrible for that. And here we are riding it off a cliff 100 years later. We have record high GDP. You know what else is at record highs in this country? Stress, financial anxiety, suicides, drug overdoses. It has gotten so bad that our collective life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years in a row.
You forgot Chet.
Debt, yeah, financial security and indebtedness, student loan debt. When is the last time America's life expectancy declined for 3 years in a row? The Spanish flu of 1918, 100 years ago, global pandemic, killed millions. We are back in Spanish flu territory as a society because of drug overdoses and suicides. We're following this GDP measurement to our own detriment. Self-driving trucks will be tremendous for GDP. It's going to increase it by tens of billions of dollars. It's going to be disastrous for many, many communities around the country. How many of you have run an organization or a division or a company? Imagine you had the wrong measurements for that organization. How's that organization going to do over time? That is where we are as a country right now. We have three big measurements that get thrown in our faces by business and media every freaking day. And what are they? GDP, stock market prices, headline unemployment, right? And they say if these three things are solid, then we're in great shape. GDP, measuring the wrong things. Stock market prices, the top 20% of Americans own 92% of stock market wealth. The bottom 80% own 8%. The bottom 50% of Americans own essentially zero. So if you're cheerleading the stock market, you're cheerleading the fortunes of the top 20% of Americans, which is not obviously relevant to the majority of us. Headline unemployment does not include labor force participation, doesn't include underemployment, doesn't include temporary or gig or contract work. If you look at our labor force participation rate right now, we're at 63%, the same levels as Costa Rica and El Salvador. Multi-decade low. Millions of Americans have gotten pushed out of the workforce. And if you remember Donald Trump in 2016, what did he say? Headline unemployment rate is fake news, and now that he's president, he's like, oh, it's great. You remember that? Remember that switch? And he did say we're going to make America great again. And then what did Hillary Clinton say in response?
It's already great.
America's already great. And that did not work. We need a different message. We need to say, look, we get it. The struggles are real. The problems are real. People are getting pushed to the side. We're more stressed out. We're more indebted. We're working harder for less. Our costs just keep creeping up. You notice how health insurance only goes in one direction? You guys ever remember getting that letter from the health insurance company being like, good news, it's cheaper this year? What's going on with that? You have entire industries whose business model is just sticking it to the American people progressively. And we're at a point now where we have to turn it around. So these are a couple of the big plans. One is the freedom dividend, and after you all get $1,000 a month, thank you New Hampshire, in 2021, after you get this $1,000 a month, how would you spend it in real life? I want you all to reflect on it a little bit. It's a beautiful vision. I'll walk you through. So Andrew Yang right now is, I was fourth in the polls in one recent poll. Do you all see that?
Yeah.
And I'm going to suggest to everyone here that it's a lot harder to go from anonymous to fourth in the polls than from fourth to first. Fourth to first happens all the time. So after we take this vision to the rest of the country, I become president, we pass the freedom dividend, everyone's like, wow, that happened, it's beautiful, you get the $1,000 a month, how would you actually spend it in real life? Home improvement. Kids education, child care, start a business, car repairs. How much of it would stay right here in New Hampshire? Most all of it. A little bit of it would float up to the cloud. You might upgrade your Netflix subscription and buy an extra toaster on Amazon. But most of it would go to daycare and Little League signups and local nonprofits. This establishment, you'd probably come here a little bit more often, like throw down an extra room.
Yep.
And then each of these local businesses then hires, expands, stays open. This is the trickle-up economy, from our people, our families, and our communities up. And this is particularly important for rural areas that are the first to get depleted in the 21st century, where if you grow up in a rural area, you know your property taxes go up, your school costs go up, and you feel like your kids, unfortunately, feel like they have to leave in order to live the kind of life that they want. You know, they feel like they have to go to Boston, they have to go someplace else. That's happening to rural areas around the country, and the dividend would be a game changer. Because $1,000 a month actually allows us to rebuild our local economies in a way that reflects our own priorities and values. Right now, we're getting brainwashed into thinking that all of us are just market inputs. It's like economic value and human value are the same things. And if your town has no economic value, it should stop existing. This is how you wind up with the thinking that we're going to turn truck drivers into coders. You guys ever heard some of this ridiculousness? It makes no sense at all. I've been to the truck stop, and if you had a clipboard saying, how would you like to sign up for my coding school, I'd be more likely to get punched in the face than have someone sign up. But that's the kind of ridiculous thinking that happens when you just get brainwashed by like the market. You're like, if you don't have economic value, then we're gonna toss you aside, and we will go to ridiculous lengths to plug you into the market so you can be, you can be productive again. So we have to evolve past this point, because the market right now is gonna turn on us progressively. It's gonna zero out the truckers. I was an unhappy lawyer for 5 months, which is long enough to know that AI can do a lot of that job too. That's true. And it doesn't matter if the truck driver is conscientious and hardworking or lazy. The robot truck doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the radiologist is diligent and studious, or the opposite, because the software can just see tumors on a radiology film that the human eye cannot, and can reference millions of data points more than any human doctor can. If we keep on following the market logic, we're going to lose on an epic, catastrophic scale. And you can see it right now. You can see it with our communities disintegrating. You can see it in our turning on each other. How many of you all would agree with this statement? That America is getting less reasonable, less rational, less optimistic, and more prone to bad ideas and bad leadership. Yeah, we have that feeling. And the main cause for it is this. In a country where 78% of us are living paycheck to paycheck and almost half can't afford an unexpected $400 bill, you have a mindset of scarcity. And studies have shown that if you're focusing on just trying to make time-money trade-offs and paying next month's rent, it has the functional impact of decreasing your IQ by 13 points, or 1 standard deviation. So if you think our society is getting less reasonable, less rational, less optimistic, and more prone to bad ideas, we are. Because that is what you would expect if you were to introduce pervasive financial insecurity into a society. That is why we're turning on each other. That's why the polarization is so bad. That's why it feels like we're having totally different conversations. We have to get the boot off of our fellow citizens' throats. And if we do that, then you'll see us actually get more reasonable, more rational, and more forward-looking. We'll be able to tackle real problems like climate change that threaten us all. I didn't say that for you. So this description, this diagnosis of our problems and real set of solutions is why my campaign is now growing and growing and growing. And I present to you all the case for me as the nominee. I am one of only 2 candidates in the field that 10% or more of Donald Trump voters said they will support. So if I'm your nominee, I sense there are some in this room. That means if I'm your nominee, we will win. And that is the #1 criteria that Democrats have for the nominee. Really, think about it for a second. It's circular. It's like, what do we want a nominee? Just beat Donald Trump. Please, please, please beat Donald Trump. What America has not figured out yet, that there is a sure thing to beat Donald Trump, and you're looking at him.
Yep.
It's true, that's the math. If you get the Democrats and progressives plus 10% of Donald Trump voters, plus my fair share of independents and libertarians and people that feel